In this video, you are going to understand about Spring's support for JDBC. Firstly, we'll understand what will happen if I'm not using Spring's support for JDBC. Then I'll introduce you to something called as Jdbc Template. Let us get started. So first, without using Spring's JDBC support, let us see the earlier code. Earlier, we are using Jdbc account repository. We are not using Spring's JDBC support here. If I'm not using Spring's JDBC support, see how I'm doing. Here this method will have to return an account object based on account number. So what am I doing? This is a query. I'm getting a connection from data source, then preparing a statement for the query, setting the values for the parameters, then executing query. I'll get a result set. Then from the result set, I have to extract the data and I have to create the account object. And I am returning the account object. I am closing the connection. Am I handling the exceptions? No. A biggest problem in this code is I'm not handling exceptions. What will happen if exception occurs at this point anywhere in this code? Will the connection be closed? No. Connection will not be closed. This line will not be executed. Connection will not be closed. So this will result in connection leakage. That is one problem. Normally, for a Java developer, if you have a new Java developer who is working in the team, he'll mostly not handle exceptions, which will result in connection leakage. This is one problem. And one more thing is, if you see the second method, what is this method doing? It has to return all the accounts. Here also, what I'm doing, I am getting a correction, preparing a statement, and if this query is having any parameters, I have to set the values in the statement, executing the query. Then what? I have to map each row in the result set to an account object and adding to list and finally returning. And here also again I need to take care to close the connection, handle exceptions if any. Here also I'm not handling exception, there's a problem. So even for saving also, again opening a connection, preparing a statement, setting the values, executing query. Actually you see there are a lot of redundant steps in all the methods. Creating a connection, that means getting a connection from database, data source, preparing a statement, setting values, executing it, handling exceptions, mapping the result set row to an object, all are the common things. So whenever you are doing anything using JDBC, there are some common steps. So if there are some common steps whenever you are performing various operations, if you know template design pattern, can you just refer and check what is template design pattern? So template design pattern says if there are some common steps to be done whenever you are performing different logics, then you can take all the common steps and create a template. So now with that idea, if I try to create my own template, let us see how to create a template, my own template. I have just created some template. I'll just show you. Yep, in this project I have my Jdbc template I have created. So if I have to create template, see what my Jdbc template I created is a template class, and it requires data source. Assume that it will be injected. Now this is a template method. Query is a template method. So actually let me open the previous account repository. Yep, actually in this method, if you see, these are all the common steps, but mapping a result set row to account is not a common step. In another place, I may want to map the result set to some customer object. So mapping the row to result set is not a common thing. So take that code which is not common into some other part. So if you see my template method, my method is taking query and row mapper. Row mapper is a interface. Let me just show you. Row mapper is the interface, and here there is a method which will take result set, map the result set, a row in result set to an object, and it has to give. So I'll assume that an implementation of row mapper will be passed. Okay. And then if the query is containing some parameters, the values for parameters have to be passed, right? So this query method is having all the common code. This is a template method. What is it doing? It's taking the connection from the data source, handling exceptions properly, and see, here I have the code to close the connections properly in case of anything as well. And finally, and from the connection I'm preparing a statement using this query passed. I'm preparing and I'm iterating over all the arguments, and I'm setting the values inside statement, then executing the query, then iterating over each each row in the result set. I'm calling row mapper dot map row. So here is the logic, the additional logic where I have delegated the row mapper dot map row should map the result set to row. So see, I have an implementation of row mapper here. Account mapper. See, account mapper is implementing row mapper. Here row mapper I'm using, it is using generics. So since I gave account, the return type of this method also will be account. So this map row method is taking result set and it is returning account object. Here I have a logic to extract the data from the result set and prepare an account object and return the account object. This is an implementation, simple implementation of my row mapper. And if this row mapper instance is passed as an argument, my method will simply return list of objects. That's all. You don't need to worry about boilerplate code. Now the same Jdbc account repository, if you see here in this Jdbc project, so what I will do is simply here assume my Jdbc template is created. New my Jdbc template, and what I do here is okay, here I'll just use for finding a list of accounts in this method. This is a query to be fired, find all accounts. So I'm creating an object of my Jdbc template. So what I have to do here, my Jdbc template dot query. I have to pass a query. This is a query, and row mapper. I have to pass an object of row mapper. So I'll pass new account mapper. Sorry. New account mapper and arguments. Is this query containing some parameters? No, so I will not pass it. It's object dot dot dot. So this will give me a list of accounts. That's all. In single line, if I'm using a template, if somebody can write a template for me in a single line, I can get the result. Earlier, how many lines I wrote for the same? If you see, this is the number of lines which I wrote without using template. If somebody can write a template, my code will be simple as a single line, and the template should take care of handling exceptions properly and closing the connections properly. And also it will be good if the SQL exceptions are handled and it can rethrow some Spring specific or runtime exceptions, some common runtime exceptions. So handle exceptions and rethrow them as runtime exceptions. Jdbc API will throw all checked exceptions. Mostly, even though we handle exceptions in our code, we don't do anything except logging. Is it? So mostly what I want is if exceptions can be handled properly and if those exceptions can be rethrown as runtime exceptions, it will be good. So I'll be happy if somebody can give me a ready-made template which can do all this without me doing it. Yes, in Spring JDBC support they gave a class already called as JDBC Template. JDBC Template simplifies the use of JDBC API. It eliminates the repetitive boilerplate code. If you are not using Spring JDBC support, in each and every method you need to write a repetitive boilerplate code like opening connection, preparing statement, executing query, mapping the rows to result set to objects, handling exceptions. All these are boilerplate code. The JDBC template eliminates the repetitive boilerplate code and it alleviates us from the common cause of bugs. So as I told you, common cause of bugs is not handling exceptions properly. JDBC template will handle the exceptions properly, and JDBC template also will make sure that it will convert the JDBC exceptions to Spring specific runtime exceptions. So whenever you are using JDBC template, the methods of JDBC template will never throw checked exceptions. They always throw runtime exceptions, so you don't need to handle, right? So to use JDBC template, it depends on data source. You just need to inject data source into it. Then you can use it for querying. So suppose if you want to use JDBC template to fire a select query, which will result only one column and one row. One column and one row, and you know that the row type is string. Then you can use query for object. See, this query is returning string. Name inside the account is a string. So query for object, and then what is the column type you are expecting? String.class. That's it. So this will give the object, right? So let me just show you in this. I have a method. So what I have to do? I know that this query will result in one row because I am firing a query based on primary key and one column, and I know the column type is string. So what I can do? I can use JDBC template. So if you see here, I auto wiring the JDBC template. How am I configuring JDBC template? Let me show you. Here is the application config. How to configure JDBC template using Java configuration. So I'll create public. Return type is JDBC template. JDBC template. And I'll just return new JDBC template. There's a constructor of JDBC template which takes data source. So data source is defined inside infrastructure config. I'm auto wiring it and I'm using it here. This is how we can define a JDBC template as a bean. Okay. Then I can use it. Here if you see in my code what I'm doing. Okay, see here, this is a method which I was writing. This method returns one single column, one single row. So I can use a method JDBC template dot query for object. Query for object is a template method which takes a query, comma required type. What is the type of name? String. I know. Varchar corresponding Java type is string. So this will give me the name and I am returning the name, right? So let me yeah, already test cases are there. You can run test cases whenever you are writing the lab. Now what if you are firing a query which will result in multiple columns but one row? Here I am firing a query which will return multiple columns, account number, name, is active, etc. But I am firing a query using primary key. I know that this query will result in only single row. So I can use query for map. Right? So assume that for this query, I don't have a domain class or an entity class. I don't have a corresponding class to map this result set. Then what I can do, I can use query for map. This will return a single map. What will be the key to map? Key to map will be nothing but name of the column in the result set, and value will be the column value. So I have a method. Let me just complete it. See, this is the same thing which I was showing. I can use Jdbc template dot query for map, and I'll pass a query. That's it. But this query is having some parameters. So if you see query for map, what is syntax? I can pass object dot 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 args. So comma account number. That's it. This query will give me list of maps, and the key to the map will be the column name in the result set, and value will be the column value. Okay. So next. What if you are firing a query which will result in multiple rows and multiple columns? So let me just show you. Multiple rows and multiple columns. But you don't have a domain class to map your row. Then you can go for query for list. Query for list will give you list of maps. It will prepare one map for each row. One map for each row, and I will get list of maps. So the method to be used is query for list. Right? But what you can do is, if you have a domain object for mapping a result set row like account, what you can do, you can write your account mapper, implementation of row mapper like this. So there is a class called as account mapper which I wrote, implementing row mapper. So you have to write your logic inside map row. So here if you see, I am extracting the data from the result set, and I am populating the account object and returning the account object. So this account mapper, which is an implementation of row mapper, will take care of mapping one row in result set to a account. So in such case, what you can do, if this is your account mapper, then you can use Jdbc template dot query for object, and let me just show you through code the same thing. Yep. Suppose if I have where clause here, where a dot, yeah, here it is, sorry, here is the first method. Yeah, so this is a query. This query will return number of columns but single row. I have an account object, I want to map it to account object. So what I can do, I can use Jdbc template dot query for object. See, there are a lot of overload query for object. This first one is the one which I used when I know when I am firing a query which results in one row, one column. But now there are multiple columns. I can go for query for object using row mapper. So I'll pass a query, and the row mapper is what? Account mapper, new account mapper. That's it. So this query for object will return me an object of account. It will internally use this row mapper to map the row in result set to one object. But if I'm using a query, if I'm firing a query which will result in multiple columns and multiple rows, see, I'm not having a where clause. This will result in multiple rows. So I want list of objects. So what is the method to be used? I'll use Jdbc template dot query. There's a method called as query. See, there are a lot of overloaded query methods. What you can do is you can use a query method which is taking row mapper. See, this is a query, comma row mapper, new account mapper. That's it. So this template method query will take care of firing the query, mapping each result set row to row mapper, account mapper, and then it will return you the list of accounts. You don't need to bother about any of the low level boilerplate code. That's it. Right? Okay, but now you are feeling, hey, why should I write an implementation of row mapper? Again, I am writing my logic. I am very lazy. I don't want to write my own implementation of row mapper. Yes, Spring supports you as well. What you can do is, instead of using your own row mapper, there's a predefined implementation of row mapper from Spring called as bean property row mapper. So I'll use it like this: new bean property row mapper. And what is a mapped class? Mapped class is what I want to map it to account dot class. That's it. And I'll pass a generic. Its actual class is in generic. See, again, this query method, what it will do, it is returning list of accounts. So this bean property row mapper is an implementation of predefined implementation of row mapper. What it will do, it will internally use reflection API. If you make sure that the column name in your result set is same as a property of your domain class, then automatically it will map. It will internally use reflection API to find a property in account whose name is same as the result set column name. Then it will automatically map. So you can use this bean property row mapper. Only thing is the convention you need to follow the column in the result set. You can even use alias which will match the field inside your account. It's not the column name in database, the column name in the result set. You can use alias if the database column names are different. So if the column name in the result set is same as the property of account, you can use bean property row map. It's very simple. So this is how you can use. Okay. So wherever you are using row mapper, you can use bean property row mapper like this. Now, there might be a scenario where you might be firing a query which will result in some 10,000 rows. If you are using this Jdbc template query, what will do, you'll get a list of 10,000 objects. What if this query is returning some 100,000 records? You'll be getting a list of 100,000 records where sometimes you might go out of memory. So in some cases, what you may want to do is you may want to fire a query, but you don't want a list of objects. For each row in the result set, you want to execute some logic. So what you can do is you can write an implementation of row callback handler. Right? See what I am doing. See, I am passing an implementation of row callback handler. So you are writing an implementation of row callback handler. Okay. 1 minute. Okay, if you see here, I have an implementation of row callback handler, and here in this process row, I'll have a logic to process each row. Whatever logic I want to execute for each row, I'll write it here. Then I'm using Jdbc Template.query. The query method is taking query, comma, the row callback handler object. So what it will do, the Jdbc template now, it will fire the query. It will take care of all the boilerplate code like managing connections, preparing statements, executing queries. And now for each row in the result set, it will call this row callback handler dot process row. So if you have a situation where you want to fire a query which will result in a lot of rows, but you are not interested in list of all objects. You want to process the row. Then you can use a row callback handler, right? Okay. And also one more scenario. Let's assume a scenario where I am firing a query which is resulting in multiple rows and multiple columns. Earlier, we were using a row mapper to map each row to one object. But now what I want is, I want the whole result set to be mapped to a single object. I have a complex object which I want to map. Take a simple example. Let's assume that I have a table called as order item and order. Order ID is a primary key here, and order ID is a foreign key here. So one order can contain multiple items. So I find a query where I want to get order object for order ID, say 1000. And for order ID 1000, let's assume that there are 5 rows here. Right? So if I fire a query joining both tables for order ID 1000, how many rows will I get in my result set? I'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. So this 5 rows, I want to map it into a single order class. So if you see the order class, one order class will have list of order item. So this 5 rows have to map it to single order, and I have to map it to list of order items as well. So I have a complex mapping where I want number of rows to be mapped to one object. So in such scenarios, what you can do is you can use result set extractor implementation. You can write an implementation of a result set extractor. See, this is an implementation of result set extractor. Here I can write a logic of mapping the whole result set to one single order object. Then what I can use? Jdbc template.query, the query, and I'm passing an implementation of result set extractor. Here also again this template method query will take care of managing connections, preparing a statement, setting the values inside the statement, and executing the query. After query is executed, it is getting result set. It is passing the result set to this extract data method, and the returned object will be returned to you. So if you have a scenario where you want to fire a query which will result in multiple rows, but you want to map it to a single object, then you can use result set extractor like this. Okay. Then if you want to fire any insert query, it's simple. Jdbc template dot update. You pass a query, and your query insert query might be having a lot of parameters. You have to pass all the parameters. That's it. Similarly, if you want to fire update query, the method is same. Jdbc template dot update, and you have to pass all the values for. You have to pass a query, comma, all the values. Similarly, for deleting also single method update. So by using Jdbc template, you can fire Jdbc template.update, you can fire insert, update and delete queries. Single method for firing insert, update and delete. So let me summarize whatever we have learned. Suppose if you are firing a query which will result in one row, one column, and you know that the column type is say date in the database. What is the method you are going to use? You can use Jdbc template dot query for object, then you pass a query, comma, date dot class. So whenever your query results in single row, single column, and you know the query column type, you can use Jdbc template dot query for object. Okay. Then another scenario. You know that you are firing a query which will result in single row but multiple columns Okay, single row but multiple columns, and you don't have a domain class. You are firing something like select star from account, but you don't have a account class. So in such cases, what is the method to be used? Jdbc template dot query for map. Do you remember? Query for map will give you a map. So what the map will contain? Key is nothing but the column name in the result set, and value is a column value. Okay. Suppose if you are firing a query which will result in multiple columns and multiple rows, what you can do? Jdbc template dot, the method is what? Query for list. This will give you list of maps. For each row, it will create a map and it will put all the maps in a list, and you'll get list of maps. Right? This is a scenario where you don't have a domain object. Suppose if you have a domain object, you are firing a query which will result in one row. Say you are firing select star from account, but you would have an account class, then you can use Jdbc template dot query for object, but now you have a row mapper, so you'll pass a query comma row mapper, account mapper, or bean property row mapper, as I told you, right? Row mapper. So this will give you the account object if you are passing a row mapper which can map a row to account. Similarly, if you are firing a query which will result in multiple rows and multiple columns, and you want a list of Java objects, then you can use Jdbc template dot query. Then you can pass a query comma row mapper implementation. This will give you list of account objects in this case, right? Okay. Then what is the method in Jdbc template for firing insert query, update query, delete query? Single method, Jdbc template dot update. Pass a query, and if your query is containing some placeholders, you pass a comma separated values. Then one more scenario, you are firing a query which will result in a number of rows and columns, but this is too heavy, like you are getting some 100,000 rows. You don't want list of all objects, so you can use an implementation of row callback handler. As I showed you, row callback handler implementation, you need to write an implementation of row callback handler, and you have to pass it to Jdbc template dot query. So this Jdbc template dot query will fire the query, it will get the result set. For each row in the result set, it will call your row callback handler dot process row, where your business logic is executed. And finally, if you are firing a query which will result in multiple rows, but you want to map multiple rows to single object, then you can use result set extractor. It will extract a single object from the whole result set. This is how you can write it, right? So now you understood how to use Jdbc template in multiple ways. What you can do is you can now go through the documentation provided to you, Spring Jdbc documentation, complete the exercises. See you in next video. In next video, we'll be discussing about AOP, aspect oriented programming.